Hello and welcome to Lancer Starcraft's beginner guide to Starcraft 2 terminology and watching commentaries. Sort of keeping in line with this theme that I'm going for lower and mid-level players. Starting to get into the high-level play, one of the big things that a lot of people will do is go and watch replays from HD Husky, Day 9. And if you've never watched these before, it can sometimes be a little bit difficult to watch because you don't always know what the commentator is talking about. So this will just be a short guide to a lot of the terms you'll hear and what they mean in a very broad sense. I'm not going to go into crazy detail. If you want to know any of these terms in really explicit detail, I encourage you to go to teamliquid.net and click on the Liquipedia section, which will have detailed explanations of pretty much everything I'm going to talk about in this. So, getting right into it, our first basic term is micro, which is short for micromanagement. Now, in a broad sense, this means basically your control over any individual unit at a point in time. The way you'll hear it used often in commentaries is to describe the way in which a player of high level is using a single unit and exploiting that unit's range or speed advantage over another unit in order to attack and take no damage in return. So, for example, Hellions are faster than Zerglings without speed. So you can sort of kite or make the Zerglings chase the Hellion while simultaneously doing damage and the Hellion's not taking any damage. That's sort of an example of micro, a very basic example. The flip side of that being macro. Macro management, sort of, if you think about this, the micro is sort of the small picture of, utilizing units on a piece-by-piece basis, whereas macro is the whole picture. Everything that's going on, your economy, how you're taking in resources, how you're using resources, food, which is your supply count, and controlling your supply count to make sure you don't get supply blocked. And teching, which is utilizing the structures to move higher up the tech tree to build better and stronger units. Macro management is really big for beginning players, I would say. The biggest problem that beginner and mid-level players have is efficiently using their resources, not letting their money go high. So basically, utilizing their macro. And I would say that macro is much more important than micro on a large scale, because macro is really going to win you a game, whereas micro is just going to get you an advantage. Moving right along, the next one I want to talk about is something that you'll hear a lot is the word builds. Now, what does builds mean? Builds are sort of this idea that a player goes in with a plan, and this plan details, for a short period of time, everything he's going to build from the beginning of the game to a certain point in the game. He'll have in his head mapped out. He'll know all the timings. He'll know, I have to build a spawning pool at 13 supply. So we'll say that's a 13 pool. And then I'm going to build a hatchery at 16 supply. So that's a 16 hatch. So you'll hear that a lot. So whenever you hear a commentator saying, "Oh, he's going for the 1-1-1 build," that's specifying that he has a specific order of how he wants things to go, and how he's going to build his buildings, and how he's going to advance up the tech structure in a very defined sense. The next one I have here is harassment. And what does harassment mean? Harassment is sort of, it goes along with micro in that you're using a unit that has some sort of very, either you're flying or some sort of speed advantage. Any advantage that allows you to circumvent a player's defenses and get into his economy, which is, his workers, and kill workers and harass his workers and stop mining and sort of try and gain some sort of economic advantage. That's what harassment means, So if you see a Reaper going to the Mineron, that's a sort of harassment, It's not going to end the game. It's not something that you're going to lose doing. It's really just annoying. It just, you just get in the guy's head and he's just pissed off that this is happening. That's what they mean by harassment. The next thing I want to talk about is something you'll hear a lot say, they'll describe the period of the game that you're in by early game, and your mid-game, and your late game. Now, what does this mean? Those things aren't really, there isn't a set time that now you're in the mid-game, This is, 10 minutes mid-game. Mid-game is more of a broad sense of a player's strategy. So you have an early game strategy, you have a mid game strategy, and you have a late game strategy. And there aren't specific timings to it. It's more of a feel. So, for instance, if a player who's been going roaches and hydras for most of the game, and I apologize if all my examples are very Zerg heavy. I'm a Zerg player myself, so it's just easier for me. If you have a player who's been going roach and hydra for the most of the game, and then he starts building ultras or broodlords, that player is transitioning from the mid game into the late game. So you can see he's moving up the tech structure. This is his late game. This is his end game. This is his strategy for how he's going to win at the end of the game. So hence, late game, end game, that sort of thing. The next thing that I have to mention is going to be kind of awkward, because I know as soon as I say this word, somewhere out on the West Coast, Mr. Sean Day9 Plot is going to be just for no reason angry at everything. But the word what I have to talk about is about counters, and Day9 hates this word, so I'm going to try to avoid using it. Counters basically just mean any unit that is really effective against another unit. Now, there are hard counters, things that, this one unit does really well against this unit. And if I have to pick one, I'll say, Marauders hard counter roaches, because they get a big attack bonus versus roaches. Whereas there are soft counters, which they this unit, it's effective in dealing with this other unit, and that if you have two forces of equal size, all of one unit, then the unit that soft counters the other is going to win, because it's just a little bit better. Yeah, that's all I'm going to say for that, because I can already, I can feel Mr. Day9's eyes staring at me somehow from 1,000 miles away. Anyway, moving right along. The next one I want to talk about is walling and walling in. This you use a lot, and this is really a very simple term. It's really, you'll see Terrans do this more often than any other race. They will build their buildings in such a way that you literally can't get past their buildings. In other words, you have to destroy a building in order to get into their base. And they'll hold to do this with supply depots and barracks. You also see Protoss do it less efficiently, because they can't completely wall off. What they'll do is they'll make a wall with just a little hole in it, and they'll put some zealots there or something like that. Just basically to prevent things from just running in the base and attacking their worker line. But that's really what walling in means. The next thing I want to talk about is a sort of term called a push or a timing push. Now, what is a timing push? A timing push is any sort of attack or aggression that's geared toward attacking an enemy when you think or know that he's going to be weak for this window of time. So a lot of this is talked about Zerg. This happens a lot more with Zerg than I think. Well, maybe I'm biased, but Zergs often have these timing windows where they're only building drones and they're not building units. So they'll be very weak in the unit department, and that's like a window of time where they're only building drones and they don't have a lot of units. That's what we call a timing window, and that would be when a timing push would happen, when a Protoss or a Terran or even another Zerg would push at that time, because he knows the Zerg isn't going to have any units. Sort of going along with this, but not really the same thing, is the idea of an all-in. When you hear a commentator or a caster talk about an all-in, it's really an attack that say you have a player whose entire build is geared towards this all-in move. And it's often sort of looked down upon by a lot of players, but basically it means is I'm going to get these units, and this is a high-risk, high-reward maneuver, right? If this works, I win the game. But if this doesn't work, I'm going to lose the game. That sort of thing. So when you talk about an all-in, basically it's, if you watch poker, the player is casting all his chips in, saying I'm putting everything on this hand. And that's really what an all-in is in Starcraft 2. Maybe Starcraft.